Get your hands off him. Isabella Romano didn't think. She stepped between the two men and the bleeding child pressed against the alley wall. A 9-year-old boy she had never seen before in her life, and she said it again louder this time. I said get your hands off him. If you've ever watched someone choose courage over common sense, you know exactly what that moment looks like. That was Isabella, right there, in a wet Naples alley at 11 o'clock at night. Before we go further, if this is your first time here, subscribe to this channel and follow this story all the way to the end. And leave a comment right now telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The rain had stopped about 20 minutes before Isabella found him. She knew the exact moment the rain stopped because she had been standing under the hospital's side entrance, overhang her bag over her shoulder, her jacket half-zipped, watching the water drain off the edge of the roof in sheets. She was tired in the particular way that emergency medicine makes you tired. Not sleepy, not physically exhausted, but hollowed out somewhere behind the sternum, like something essential had been gently scooped away over the course of 14 hours. She had worked a double shift because Dr. Ferreira had called in sick, and someone had to stay. Isabella always stayed. That was the thing about her. 10 years in Chicago's Cook County Emergency Department had not taught her to say no. If anything, it had made the word feel foreign in her mouth, strange and slightly dishonest, like wearing someone else's coat. She had been back in Naples for exactly 23 days. Her father had grown up in this city in a cramped apartment in the Quartiere Spagnoli, and he had spent 40 years in America talking about it with the specific tender ache of a man who knows he will never fully go back. He died 2 springs ago, and when the medical nonprofit she worked with offered her a temporary placement at a small community clinic in Naples, 6 months, maybe 8, Isabella had said yes before they finished the sentence. She told herself it was professional. A chance to work in underserved communities. To do something real. But at 11 o'clock at night, walking alone down a narrow street that smelled like old stone and espresso grounds and something she couldn't name, she knew the truth was simpler and harder than that. She came here because she needed to be somewhere that felt like him. She was thinking about her father when she heard it. Not crying. That was the confusing part. She heard something that was the opposite of crying, a sound someone makes when they are actively trying not to make sound. A small, controlled, desperate suppression of noise. She stopped walking. Her medical brain was already doing the triage before the rest of her caught up. That's an injured person. Small, young, not unconscious. Trying to stay quiet, which means they're either afraid of attracting attention or they've been taught that pain is private. She turned left into the alley. The boy was sitting against the wall with his back straight and his knees pulled up and his right arm cradled against his chest. His jacket was dark navy or black, she couldn't tell in the half-light, and expensive in the way that children's clothes sometimes are when someone very wealthy is responsible for buying them. His hair was dark and damp. His face was pale. He was not crying. His eyes, when they found hers, were enormous and very still. Okay, Isabella said quietly. She didn't stop walking toward him. I'm a doctor. My name is Isabella. I'm going to look at your arm. You don't have to, the boy said. His Italian was perfect. His voice was steady in the extraordinary way that a voice is steady when someone has spent real effort making it so. You're right, Isabella said, crouching in front of him. I don't have to, but I want to. She set her bag down carefully so it didn't make a loud sound. What's your name? He looked at her for a long moment. Then, Leo. Okay, Leo. Leo what? Another pause. Shorter this time. Moretti. Okay, Leo Moretti. I'm going to look at your arm. You can tell me to stop at any time. She looked at him directly. But please don't tell me to stop. Something moved in the boy's face. Not quite a smile. The suggestion of one somewhere around the eyes. He let her look at his arm. The cut was long, 4 inches at least, starting just below his elbow and traveling toward his wrist at an angle that told her it had come from glass, not a blade. The kind of injury a child sustains when he falls through something or something falls on him. The bleeding had slowed, which meant it wasn't arterial, but the wound was deep enough to need stitches, and the edges had already begun to swell with the particular puffy tenderness of a laceration that has been sitting untended for too long. She opened her bag. She always carried more than was strictly necessary. One of her attendings at Cook County had told her early in her residency that the only difference between a good emergency doctor and a great one was whether they were prepared for the thing they didn't expect, and Isabella had never forgotten it. "This is going to sting," she said. "I know," Leo said. She cleaned the wound. He didn't flinch, not once. And that bothered Isabella more than the cut itself, because children who don't flinch when they should have usually learn the skill the hard way. "How long have you been out here?" she asked. She kept her voice conversational, casual, the same tone she used with pediatric patients in the ER when she was trying to get information without triggering panic. "I don't know." "Guess." Leo thought about it with the seriousness of a child who takes questions literally. "Maybe an hour." An hour. Alone. In an alley in Naples. Injured. At 10 years old, she'd revised her estimate up by a year when she got close enough to really look at him. 10, maybe 11. "Where are the people who were with you?" she asked. "There weren't any." "You were alone?" "Yes." She looked up at him. "Leo, where are your parents?" The boy's face did something complicated. Several things happened at once, a tightening around the jaw, a brief brightness in the eyes that didn't become tears, a very slight lift of his chin that was probably unconscious and probably learned from someone else. "I live with my uncle," he said. Isabella finished securing the bandage she'd placed over the wound. It would hold until they got to a proper facility. "Okay, your uncle. Do you have a way to contact him?" Leo reached into his jacket pocket with his left hand, careful, practiced not touching his injured arm, and produced a phone. He unlocked it and handed it to her. The emergency contact was labeled simply Zio. "Uncle." Isabella pressed call. It rang twice. "Who is this?" The voice that answered was male. Low. Unhurried in a way that immediately communicated something about the person it belonged to. Not relaxed exactly, but controlled. The way a river is controlled by the shape of its banks. "My name is Dr. Isabella Romano," she said. "I'm with a boy named Leo Moretti. He's injured. He's stable. I need to know where to bring him." A half-second of silence. Then, "Where is my nephew?" Not is he okay. Not what happened. Not how serious. Where is he? Isabella understood that instinctively. The question of location came before all other questions because the person asking it would come himself. Immediately. And he needed the coordinates. She gave him the street name and the nearest cross street. "Don't move," the voice said. "I'll be there in 7 minutes." The line went dead. Isabella looked at Leo. "Your uncle is coming." "I know," the boy said. "Does he always answer on the second ring?" Leo looked at her steadily. "He always answers on the first ring. Tonight he let it ring twice because he didn't know the number." Isabella filed that away. The car arrived in 6 minutes. Not 7. 6. It was black, and it was large, and it moved. The way expensive, powerful things move, with a smoothness that was almost aggressive. The smoothness of something that has never had to accommodate inconvenience. It stopped at the alley entrance. The man who got out was tall. That was the first thing Isabella registered. The way you register the height of a building before you register anything else about its architecture. He was tall, and he moved with the particular deliberateness of someone who had long since stopped needing to hurry because the world had reorganized itself to accommodate his pace. He was maybe 40. Dark hair, dark jacket, no tie. His face, she got a look at it as he walked into the alley, was the kind of face that would have been beautiful if it had been allowed to be. Strong jaw, serious eyes, a quality of attention in his expression that made him look like he was always solving something. He walked directly to the boy. He crouched in front of Leo. "Leo." His voice in person was what his voice had been on the phone except warmer, fractionally, the way a stone holds heat. "I'm fine," Leo said immediately. "I can see that." His hands went to the boy's face, both of them cupping Leo's jaw, turning his head slightly left and then right, with a careful, deliberate thoroughness that was purely medical in its precision. "Tell me." "I fell," Leo said. The man's eyes moved to the bandaged arm, stayed there for a moment, then moved to Isabella. He stood up. "You're the doctor," he said. "Yes." "He needs stitches." "He does. And probably a tetanus update. The wound is clean, but it's been sitting for about an hour, so I want to see how it looks under proper light before we make any other decisions." The man looked at her. She had the distinct sensation of being assessed, not unpleasantly, not rudely, but thoroughly. The way a person looks at something when they genuinely need to understand what they're dealing with. "Matteo De Luca," he said. He didn't extend his hand, he just said the name. Isabella said her own name, and also didn't extend her hand because the situation didn't call for it, and she was still holding her medical bag. "Which hospital?" he asked. "There's a clinic 3 blocks from here that I have access to. It'll be faster than the ER at this hour." He nodded once. He turned back to Leo, and in a movement so practiced and natural. It was obviously old habit. He crouched again and said something to the boy quietly, too quietly for Isabella to hear, and Leo nodded. Then Matteo straightened and looked at Isabella again. "Lead the way," he said. The clinic was small and understaffed at that hour, which meant Isabella could work without interruption. She got Leo onto an examination table, reassessed the wound under proper light, confirmed her initial read, and started setting up for sutures. Matteo sat in the only chair in the room. He sat very still, the way large, powerful things are still not relaxed but contained like pressure behind glass. He watched her work. "You're not Italian," he said. Isabella glanced up. "My father was. I grew up in Chicago." "You don't have an accent." "I have an accent. You just can't hear it yet." She looked back at Leo's arm. "Leo, I'm going to give you a small injection first. Local anesthetic. You'll feel a pinch, and then you won't feel the arm for about half an hour." "Okay," Leo said. "You've had stitches before." Leo looked at his uncle. Matteo's face didn't change. "Yes," he said. Isabella absorbed that. She prepared the injection. "Leo, look at me. Tell me something. What do you like at school?" "Mathematics," Leo said immediately. No hesitation. "Smart kid." She administered the anesthetic. Leo didn't flinch. "Why mathematics?" "Because there's always a right answer," Leo said. "You just have to find it." Isabella glanced up at Matteo. He was looking at his nephew with an expression she recognized. It was the expression of a person watching someone say something true without knowing it was true. "Smart kid," she said again, softer this time. She worked. The clinic was quiet, except for the ambient sounds of the building and the distant noise of the city outside. Naples at this hour was different from Chicago. At this hour, the sounds were older somehow, like the city was made of different materials. "How long have you been in Naples?" Matteo asked. 3 weeks. "What brought you back?" Isabella tied off a suture. "My father grew up here." "Grew up," past tense. "He died 2 years ago." A pause. "I'm sorry," Matteo said. Isabella had heard that phrase so many times in the past 2 years that it had mostly lost its texture. But the way Matteo De Luca said it had something different in it, a weight, a specificity, like the words were attached to something he understood from the inside. She looked at him. He was looking at Leo. She went back to work. When she finished, she stepped back and assessed the suture line. Clean. Even. Good. 7 stitches, she said. Keep the bandage dry for 48 hours. Change it every day. He needs to be seen again in 10 days to have them removed. She looked at Matteo. Is there a doctor he sees regularly? Yes. Good. I'll write down what I used. Make sure his doctor sees the wound tomorrow. She began cleaning up. What do we owe you? Matteo said. Isabella looked at him. Nothing. Dr. Romano. Nothing, she said again. Leo needed help. I helped him. That's the end of the transaction. Matteo looked at her for a moment. Something shifted in his expression. It was brief, barely legible, but it was there. like the first, almost imperceptible change in the quality of light before dawn. "You know who I am," he said. It wasn't a question. Isabella considered the question that wasn't a question. "I know your name." "People who know my name usually know more than that." "I don't," she said. "I've been in Naples for 3 weeks. I know you have a nephew named Leo who fell and hurt his arm. I know you answered your phone on the second ring because you didn't recognize my number. And I know you got here in 6 minutes when you said 7. She looked at him directly. "That's everything I know." Leo made a small sound from the examination table. Both of them looked at him. The boy was watching them with an expression of concentrated interest that was absolutely 9 years old. The expression of a child who understands that something important is happening and is storing the information carefully. "Are you hungry?" he asked Isabella. She blinked. "What?" "You've been working for a long time," Leo said seriously. "You should probably eat something." Isabella laughed. It surprised her, a real laugh, short and honest. The first one she'd produced in what felt like days. Matteo was watching her when she looked up. His expression had done the thing again. That barely there shift. Except this time it lasted a half-second longer. She left them at the clinic's entrance. She gave Matteo her card, the non-profit's information on one side, her personal mobile number written on the other. In the half-second she'd had to second-guess herself and decide not to. She wasn't sure why she added the personal number. Professional habit. Or something else. She didn't look too closely at it. 10 days, she said. For the stitches. Matteo took the card. He looked at it briefly, then at her. 10 days, he repeated. She nodded at Leo. Mathematics, she said. The boy almost smiled. There's always a right answer, he said. You just have to find it. She walked home in the quiet after rain. She was 2 blocks away before she realized she still didn't know what Matteo De Luca actually did. She told herself she'd look him up when she got home. She didn't look him up when she got home. She made tea. She sat at the small table in her rented apartment, and she thought about a child who had learned not to flinch, and a man who had gotten somewhere in 6 minutes instead of 7, and an old city that smelled like her father's stories. She fell asleep in the chair. In the morning, she looked him up. The first result that appeared under Matteo De Luca's name was a news article from 4 years ago. The headline was in Italian. She translated it automatically, the way people who grow up bilingual translate things effortlessly without being aware they're doing it. Camorra boss, suspected in Port Authority. Corruption investigation, De Luca family denies involvement. Isabella set down her coffee cup. She read the article. Then she read 3 more. The De Luca family had operated in Naples for 4 generations. Originally from the fishing trade, then shipping. Then over the course of the 20th century, through layers of legitimate business and illegitimate influence, into the particular category of power that functions like a government without the accountability of one. Matteo De Luca had taken over the family's operations 8 years ago, following the death of his father. He had 2 known residences, an apartment in Posillipo and a villa outside the city overlooking the bay. He had never been convicted of a crime. He was, by multiple accounts and multiple journalistic sources, the most powerful organized crime figure in Naples. Isabella read all of it. Then she sat very still for a long time. Then she looked at the card she'd left sitting on the kitchen counter, her own card, the one she'd handed to him, and thought about the fact that she had written her personal number on the back, and that he had looked at it briefly and said nothing and put it in his jacket pocket. She thought about Leo saying, "There's always a right answer. You just have to find it." She thought about the expression on Matteo De Luca's face when he crouched in front of his nephew in that alley. She thought about the word Zio programmed into a child's emergency contact. She thought about a lot of things. Then her phone rang. It was the clinic. They needed her in early. She picked up her keys and her bag, and she left the apartment, and she did not think about Matteo De Luca for the next 8 hours because she had patience, and that was where thinking belonged. But later, at the end of a long day, when she was standing at the sink, washing her hands, and the water was running, and the clinic was emptying out around her, she thought, he was there in 6 minutes. He said 7. He was there in 6. Not because he was showing off, because he was afraid. And a man like that, afraid of losing a child, that was a kind of fear she understood. She'd seen it in waiting rooms and emergency corridors, and the faces of people getting news that split their lives into before and after. That particular fear was not criminal. It was not powerful. It was not organized or strategic or politically significant. It was just love in a room it didn't know how to fill. She turned off the faucet. She dried her hands. She walked out into the Naples evening, and somewhere in the city, she knew a man named Matteo De Luca was checking a child's bandage and making sure it was dry, and she thought, well, okay then. He called 4 days later. She was between patients standing in the hallway of the clinic with a chart in her hands when her phone vibrated. Unknown number. She answered it because she always answered unknown numbers. Medical people do. Dr. Romano. His voice was exactly the same. She recognized it immediately, which surprised her slightly. She had not realized she had retained its particular quality, the low, unhurried evenness of it. Mr. De Luca, she said, Leo would like to thank you properly. A pause. Short, deliberate. I would also like to thank you properly. He doesn't have to. He wants to. Another pause. He talked about you for 2 days. Isabella looked at the chart in her hands without seeing it. What did he say? He said you told him there's always a right answer. Matteo's voice had something new in it, slight, barely there, but audible to someone paying close attention. Something warm. He's been applying that logic to several areas of his life that don't involve mathematics. Isabella almost smiled. Is that a problem? Not yet. And then, unexpectedly, something happened in his voice that she could only describe as the suggestion of amusement-controlled, brief but real. Have dinner with us on Saturday. It was not quite a question, but it was also not quite a command. It occupied the specific grammatical territory between the two. Isabella thought about the articles she'd read, the headlines, the name in print in 4 languages and 20 years of journalism. She thought about a man crouching in an alley, his hands on a frightened child's face. Where? She said. She told herself she would only stay 2 hours. She stayed 5. The villa was not what she expected, which was probably exactly the point. She had built up an expectation on the drive over something imposing, something designed to communicate status, the architectural equivalent of the voice on the phone. What she found was something quieter. The rooms were large but not ostentatious. There were books everywhere. Real books, red books, books with broken spines and folded pages, and the general appearance of objects that had been handled rather than displayed. There was a kitchen that had clearly been cooked in regularly. There were drawings on the refrigerator door. Leo's drawings, geometric and precise, labeled in a child's careful handwriting. Leo himself appeared approximately 30 seconds after she arrived and presented her with a drawing of what appeared to be the alley where they'd met, rendered with the particular artistic confidence of a child who doesn't yet know he's supposed to doubt his skill. This is where you found me, he said. I was going to draw you holding the flashlight, but I made you too tall, and I didn't want to start over. I like it, Isabella said. I'm keeping it. Leo assessed her seriously. Then, Uncle Matteo made dinner. Did he? He's a good cook. He made pasta alla matriciana, and it's better than the restaurant down the street, and I told him that, and he said not to tell the restaurant. Solid advice. I know, Leo said gravely. Matteo appeared from the kitchen. He had changed from whatever he'd been wearing when she arrived. She hadn't seen him arrive, only heard him from the next room, and he was in a dark shirt now. Sleeves rolled to the elbow, and he was carrying a dish towel over his shoulder in the way of someone who had been genuinely cooking, not performing it. He looked at Isabella, and then at the drawing in her hands, and something happened in his expression. That shift again. Longer this time. You came, he said. I said I would. He nodded once. Dinner's ready. They ate at a table near this window. The city was below them. Naples at night in full voice. The sound of it came through the glass like music heard from another room. Leo ate with the focused enthusiasm of a child who has been told to have good table manners and is managing the gap between the instruction and the impulse. He talked. A lot. About school and mathematics and a television program about engineering that he had watched 14 times, and a theory he had developed about why the Colosseum in Rome was built the way it was. Isabella listened. She asked questions. Real ones, not the kind adults ask children as a courtesy, but the kind that mean you are actually interested in the answer. Matteo was quiet through most of it. But he watched. He watched Isabella. He watched his nephew watching Isabella. He ate pasta, and watched both of them, and was quiet. And Isabella, who was good at peripheral attention after a decade in emergency medicine, caught him watching approximately 3 times, and looked back at him, and he didn't look away. That was interesting. "Leo," he said after a while, "go tell Maria to bring the dessert." Leo looked instantly suspicious. "You just want to talk to her without me?" "Yes," Matteo said simply. Leo considered this. Then, "Fine. But I want to hear about Chicago." He looked at Isabella. "You can tell me about Chicago after dessert." He left the room. Matteo looked at Isabella. "He's remarkable," she said. "You know that." "Yes. I've been doing emergency medicine for 10 years. You learn to read children quickly in that setting. There's a quality about him." She considered. "He doesn't perform emotions. They're just there or they're not." "His mother was the same," Matteo said. Isabella looked at him. "His parents. His mother was my sister." His voice was even. Whatever had lived in that sentence at some point had been compressed into something smaller over the years, made portable. "She died 4 years ago. His father 6 months after." "I'm sorry," Isabella said. She meant it with the fullness she rarely managed for that phrase anymore. She meant it for the loss, and also for the particular landscape it had created. A powerful, dangerous man, who had looked up one day and found himself the guardian of an 11-year-old boy, and had apparently been making pasta alla matriciana ever since. "Don't be sorry for Leo," Matteo said. He said it without sharpness, factually. "He has everything he needs. Except his parents." A pause. "Except his parents," he agreed. The silence between them had a quality she recognized from rooms where difficult truths had just been spoken. Not uncomfortable, but weighty. The kind of silence that means something is being processed. "You know who I am," Matteo said. Again that phrase. But this time he said it with a slight difference, not testing, not warning, but something more direct. "You read about me." "Yes." "And you came anyway." Isabella looked at him steadily. "I came to dinner. You cooked pasta. Leo showed me his drawing." She tilted her head slightly. "I'm not sure what you think I've agreed to." Something happened at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. The architecture of one. "Nothing," he said. "I'm not asking you for anything." "No. No." He looked at his wine glass, then back at her. "Leo hasn't talked about anyone like that in 4 years. Any adult. He catalogued specific things you said, verbatim." He paused. "You don't see that every day." "He's easy to talk to," Isabella said. "He listens. He gets that from his mother." "And you?" Matteo was quiet for a moment. "I manage," he said. Leo came back then, followed by a woman carrying dessert, and the conversation shifted and softened and became about Chicago and mathematics, and the structural reasoning behind ancient Roman architecture. And Isabella stayed 2 hours past, when she had told herself she would leave. When she finally stood to go, Leo walked her to the door with the seriousness of a child who has been taught that guests must be seen out properly. He shook her hand. Both hands actually hers in both of his, and said, "Thank you for fixing my arm." "Thank you for the drawing," she said. Matteo was standing near the door. He held her coat. He had picked it up from somewhere, she didn't know when, and she put it on, and he didn't try to help her with it, just held it until she took it. 10 days, he said. She had told him 10 days for the sutures. That was what he meant. "Yes," she said. They looked at each other in the doorway. Then Isabella said, "He told me there's always a right answer." Matteo's expression was unreadable and readable at the same time. "What's the question?" he said. Isabella smiled small, real, the kind that happens before you decide to, and walked out into the Naples night. She did not think about the headlines on the drive home. She thought about drawings on a refrigerator door, and a child who had learned not to flinch, and a man who made pasta alla matriciana and had been in that alley in 6 minutes instead of 7. She thought, there's always a right answer. She thought, but sometimes the right answer is complicated. And somewhere in the city below, Naples kept going old and loud and layered with 100 years of stories, and Isabella Romano, who had come here because of her father, and stayed because of something she hadn't named yet, drove home through streets that were slowly starting to feel familiar. And the sutures in Leo Moretti's arm held clean and tight. And 10 days would come, as days always did. And then something else would begin. The stitches came out on a Tuesday. Isabella had expected Matteo to send a driver. Maybe the woman from the Villa Maria, or one of the silent, large-shouldered men she'd noticed near the entrance when she left that Saturday night. Men who didn't introduce themselves and didn't need to. Instead, Leo walked through the clinic door at exactly 10 in the morning with Matteo. 2 steps behind him, and Leo was wearing a backpack with a small telescope patch sewn onto the strap, and he was talking before he was fully through the door. I read that anesthetic wears off in 30 minutes, but mine wore off in 22, Leo said. Is that normal? It's within range, Isabella said. What's the range? 15 to 45 minutes, depending on body mass circulation and individual metabolic rate. Leo considered this seriously. So I have fast circulation. Probably. Uncle Matteo said the same thing. He glanced back at Matteo. He said, I've always been fast. Matteo was looking at Isabella. He had been looking at her since he walked in. Good morning, he said. Good morning. She gestured toward the examination table. Let's see how it's healing. It had healed well. Better than... The suture line was clean, and the swelling was gone, and the skin on either side had knitted together with the particular neatness of young tissue that is still optimistic about repair. 7 stitches out, she said, after she'd removed the last one. You'll have a scar. Leo looked at his arm with an expression of frank satisfaction. Good. Leo, Matteo said. What? It's a good scar. It's straight. Thank Dr. Romano. I already thanked her. I made her a drawing. Leo looked at Isabella. Did you put it up? It's on my refrigerator, Isabella said. This was true. She had put it up the same night she got home, which she had not analyzed too carefully. Leo nodded satisfied. Then, can I look at the other rooms? Leo. There are no other rooms, Isabella said. It's a one-room clinic. Leo looked around, assessed. There's a hallway. There's a hallway, Isabella agreed. Can I look at the hallway? Isabella looked at Matteo. Matteo made a brief, resigned gesture that was one of the most purely parental things she had ever seen from a man who ran organized crime in a major Italian city. Stay in the building, he said. Leo went into the hallway. They were alone. The shift in the room was immediate, and both of them felt it, and neither of them commented on it directly, which told Isabella something about the kind of people they both were. He's been asking about you, Matteo said. What kind of questions? Whether Chicago is bigger than Naples. Whether emergency medicine is the hardest kind of medicine. Whether you have children. He paused. He wanted to know if you were married. Isabella looked up from where she was disposing of the suture materials. What did you tell him? I told him it wasn't appropriate to ask. And then he asked me to find out. Isabella turned around. Matteo was sitting in the chair, the same chair he'd occupied 10 days ago, with the same quality of stillness, except that something in his posture tonight was marginally less guarded. Or maybe she was just better at reading it now. I'm not married, she said. I was engaged 4 years ago. It didn't survive. She said it plainly, the way she'd learned to say the true things that used to be hard quickly without decoration, so they didn't have time to become performance. He was a good person. We wanted different lives. Matteo was quiet for a moment. I've never been married, he said. By choice. By understanding. He looked at her steadily. The kind of life I have doesn't translate well. To what? To the expectation that the person you love will be safe. The sentence landed in the room and stayed there. Isabella didn't deflect it. She thought about what it meant to say it plainly without self-pity as simple fact. The kind of person who said it that way had sat with it for a long time. Leo's drawings are on your refrigerator, Matteo said. Yes. He's going to interpret that as a positive sign. It is a positive sign, Isabella said. I like his drawings. Matteo looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, Have lunch with us. I have patience at 1. It's 10:30. She looked at him. He looked back. Calm, unhurried, like a man who had learned that waiting was just a different kind of power. Fine, she said. But I'm ordering my own food. Something happened at the corner of his mouth. You don't trust my judgment. I don't know your judgment. Fair, he said. And this time, the suggestion of a smile became something more, not a full smile, not the kind that takes over a face, but a real one. Brief and warm, and more than she'd expected from him, which made it more than she was prepared for. She looked away first. She was not usually the one who looked away first. Lunch was at a restaurant 2 streets from the clinic, small, loud, in the particular way of places that have been feeding the same neighborhood for 30 years. The kind of noise that is not chaos, but texture. The owner recognized Matteo. The recognition moved through the room like a signal, not fearful exactly, but attentive. People sat up slightly. Conversations recalibrated. Isabella watched it happen. Leo ordered spaghetti alle vongole, and then spent 10 minutes explaining to Isabella the optimal clam-to-pasta ratio, which he had apparently researched with the same dedication he applied to Roman architecture and metabolic rates. Matteo ordered without looking at the menu. You come here a lot, Isabella said. Since I was Leo's age. He glanced around the room with the particular ease of a man in a place that has always received him. My father brought me the first time, for my birthday. You grew up in Naples. I was born here. I grew up here. I will die here. He said it without drama. The way you state a longitude and latitude. That's a strong attachment. It's not attachment, it's identity. He looked at her. You understand that. You came back here for someone who was born here and spent 40 years somewhere else. That's not geography. That's something else. Isabella was quiet for a moment. He was right, and she didn't particularly want to examine how right he was in a restaurant at 11:45 in the morning. Tell me about your sister, she said. It was a calculated move. Not manipulative, she genuinely wanted to know, but calibrated. She had learned in 10 years of emergency medicine that the way to understand what someone was carrying was not to ask about the weight, but about the thing they carried it for. Matteo's expression didn't close. That was the first surprise. She'd half expected it to. Sophia, he said. 4 years younger. Better at everything. He paused. Smarter. Funnier. She understood people immediately. You'd say one sentence and she already knew what you needed. He looked at Leo, who was fully absorbed in separating clams from their shells. Leo has her eyes. He has her way of listening. What happened to her? She was sick. 18 months. He said it in the flat tone of someone who has learned to make a fact of something that isn't. She married well. Leo's father was a good man. When she died, he tried. For 6 months he tried very hard. Then he stopped. He died of grief, Isabella said. The doctors said cardiac event. He looked at her. I'm a practical person, Dr. Romano. I know what the doctors said. But you don't believe it. I believe he didn't try to live, Matteo said quietly. And I believe that's a choice even when it doesn't feel like one. Isabella thought about her father, not the death itself, but the year before. The way he'd begun letting go of things one at a time, gently, like releasing balloons. She had not thought of it as a choice. She had thought of it as surrender. She wasn't sure anymore that they were different. So you took Leo, she said. There was no one else. There's always someone else. Not for Leo. He said it simply. Absolutely. Not for me. Leo looked up from his pasta. Are you talking about me? Yes. Matteo and Isabella said simultaneously. Leo assessed this. Good, he said. I'm interesting. He went back to his clams. Isabella laughed again, the second real laugh in 10 days, and both of them had happened in this man's company, which was something she noticed and filed away. Matteo was watching her laugh. She caught him. He didn't look away. She started running into him. That was how she thought about it at first, running into him. As though it were coincidence, or the natural density of a city folding familiar faces back toward each other. The second time was at a bookshop near the clinic 3 days after lunch. She was looking for something to read on her one afternoon off that week, and she turned a corner between shelves, and Matteo was there with a book open in his hands, reading, standing up the way people do when they mean to just check the first page and have been standing there for 15 minutes without noticing. He looked up when she appeared. "This keeps happening," Isabella said. "Yes." He agreed without apparent surprise, and closed the book and asked her what she was looking for. She told him. He walked her to the right section without hesitation, which meant he knew the store well enough to navigate it without looking at the signs, which meant he came here often, which was another piece of information she added to the growing file of things that didn't match the headlines. They spent 40 minutes in the bookshop. They left with 3 books between them and a standing disagreement about whether the novel she'd chosen was going to disappoint her in the third act. Matteo said yes. She said she'd decide for herself, and she walked back to her apartment with a book under her arm and the specific, slightly unsettling feeling of having had a good time. The third time was at the clinic. He appeared at the end of an afternoon shift with Leo, and no explanation except that Leo had a question about tetanus that couldn't wait, which was obviously not true, but which Leo delivered with complete seriousness, and Isabella entertained completely seriously because she respected the effort. The question was about tetanus. It was also about whether Isabella had read the book yet. She had read the book. She told Leo it was good. Leo relayed this to Matteo with the air of a diplomat conveying sensitive information between parties. Matteo said, "The third act." "Fine," she said. "You're lying." "I'm a doctor. I don't lie." "Everyone lies." He looked at her. The third act was weak. The third act was surprising. Surprising and weak aren't mutually exclusive. In this case, they are. Leo looked between them. Then, "Are you going to argue about this for a long time?" "Probably," Isabella said. "Good," Leo said. "I'm going to look at the hallway." And he went into the hallway, and they were alone again, and Isabella thought, this is becoming something. This is already something. And she wasn't sure yet what she was going to do about that. She went to dinner at the villa a second time, and a third. By the fourth dinner, she knew which chair was Leo's without being told. And she knew that Matteo drank water with meals and coffee afterward. And she knew that he checked his phone approximately once every 2 hours, and that whatever he saw on it, he never discussed it in front of Leo. And she knew that the drawings on the refrigerator had been joined by 2 more since her first visit. She also knew that 3 different men had called Matteo in the past 2 weeks. Different voices she'd caught fragments from across rooms, and that his voice changed on those calls. Not dramatically, not theatrically, but it changed. The warmth she'd come to expect when he spoke to Leo, or to her, pulled back, and what replaced it was something older and more careful. She knew what that meant. She had always known what it meant. She just hadn't looked at it directly yet. The direct look came on a Thursday evening between the 4th and 5th dinners, when she stayed late at the villa because Leo had wanted to show her his telescope, and the sky was clear for the first time in weeks. Leo had fallen asleep on the couch, the telescope still in his hands, with the boneless completeness of a child who has simply run out of consciousness and had no opinion about where they were when it happened. Matteo carried him to bed. He came back and found Isabella standing near the window, where the lights of Naples were spread below, like something scattered and luminous, and older than anyone in the room. He poured 2 glasses of wine he hadn't offered before, and handed her one and said nothing, and she took it and said nothing, and they stood there for a minute in the specific quality of silence that means 2 people are thinking the same thing and deciding whether to say it. Isabella said it. "What do you actually do?" she said. "Not the headlines, not the family history. What does Matteo De Luca actually do?" He didn't answer immediately. He turned the wine glass slowly in his hands. He was looking at the city. "I protect things," he said finally. "What things?" Businesses, supply chains, families, neighborhoods. He paused. Some of what I protect is legitimate. Some of it operates outside the structures that governments prefer. That's a careful way to say it. It's an honest way. He looked at her. Would you prefer the version that uses simpler words? I'd prefer the version that doesn't feel managed. A silence. Then, my family built something over 4 generations. I inherited it. I didn't choose it, not the way you choose a career. You're born into this, and then you make what you can of it. He turned to look at her fully. I have done things I'm not proud of. I have made decisions that were necessary and terrible, and I have not pretended otherwise to myself. Isabella looked at him. Have you hurt people? Yes. Innocence. I was quiet for a moment. I have tried to ensure that the answer to that is no. I cannot tell you with certainty that I have always succeeded. She absorbed that. And Leo, she said, growing up in this, Leo will not inherit this, Matteo said. The certainty in his voice was absolute, not hopeful, not aspirational, decided. The tone of a man who has made a resolution so fundamental it has become fact. Whatever else I am, whatever I have done or will do, that is the one thing I am certain of. Leo is going to study mathematics at a university and argue about Roman architecture with his professors, and he is going to live a life that is completely free of everything I have carried. Isabella looked at him for a long time. You really believe that, she said. Yes. Do you believe it because it's true, or because you need it to be true? The question landed hard. She saw it land. His jaw tightened slightly, barely visible, but she was good at faces. Both, he said after a moment. And I'm not sure that distinction matters. It matters, Isabella said. It matters because believing something doesn't make it safe. I know. And Leo is not safe just because you love him. I know that too. He set down his wine glass. Do you think I don't know that every day, Dr. Romano, every single day, I know exactly what surrounds him, and exactly how much of it I cannot control? That knowledge is the first thing I wake up with, and the last thing I am aware of before I sleep. I am not under any illusion about what I am. The room was very still. Isabella said, Then what are you asking me? He looked at her. I'm not asking you anything, he said. I am telling you who I am, because you deserve to know, and because you were going to find out regardless, and because... He stopped. Because, she said. He was quiet for a long moment. Outside Naples glittered and hummed with its ancient, patient life. Because I find that I want you to stay, he said. And that is a sentence I have not said to anyone in a very long time. The honesty of it was almost uncomfortable. The way very honest things sometimes are, they take up more room than you expect. Isabella looked at the city. She looked at her wine glass. She thought about Chicago, and her father's stories, and a child asleep on a couch with a telescope, and headlines in 4 languages, and the expression on a man's face in an alley at 11 o'clock at night. She thought about what she'd said to him once without knowing she was saying something true. I came because my father grew up here. And she thought about what she knew now, standing in this room. She was not here only because of her father anymore. I need you to be honest with me, she said. Always. Even when it's difficult. Even when you think I'd prefer not to know. Yes, he said. If there is ever a moment where Leo is in danger because of what you are, you tell me immediately. Yes. And I am not a person who can be managed. I have spent 10 years in emergency rooms, and I have told people things they didn't want to hear, because the truth was the only useful thing. I will not stop doing that because you're... She gestured briefly at all of him. Whatever you are. Something happened in his expression. Not the small shift she'd learned to read something bigger, something that moved through his whole face and resettled it into something she hadn't seen before. I know, he said. And then quieter, that's why. She looked at him. That's why I want you to stay, he said simply. A pause, long and real. Then Isabella Romano, who was practical and clear-eyed, and had read every headline and understood every implication, and was not a woman who made decisions carelessly, said, I'll stay for coffee. Matteo went to make coffee. Leo slept on the couch down the hall. And somewhere in Naples, in the old layered, beautiful, dangerous city that had belonged to 100 different powers across 1,000 years, a woman who had come here looking for something she couldn't name was beginning quietly and without ceremony to find it. She drank her coffee standing near the window. Matteo stood on the other side of the room. They talked until midnight about things that had nothing to do with danger or history or the weight of inherited lives, about mathematics and books, and what Chicago looked like in winter, and whether Naples in August was endurable. And it was ordinary conversation, and it was also not ordinary at all, and both of them knew it. When she left, Matteo walked her to the car. "Tomorrow," Leo had said, appearing suddenly in the hallway in his pajamas, with the telescope still in one hand and one eye barely open. "I want to show you Saturn. The rings are clearer when it's cold." "Leo," Matteo said. "Bed." "I'm going," Leo said, and did not move. "Can she come tomorrow?" Isabella looked at Matteo. Matteo looked at Isabella. "Saturday," she said to Leo. "If the sky is clear." Leo processed this, nodded with great seriousness, and disappeared back into the dark of the hallway. Matteo looked at her. "Saturday," he said. "Don't read too much into it," she said. "I never read into anything," he said, which was absolutely not true, and both of them knew it. She got into the car. She drove home through Naples at midnight, and the streets were alive and old and full of people who had been here longer than she had, and would be here longer than she would, and she thought about what she'd said in that room. "I need you to be honest with me. Always." And she thought about what he'd said back. Not a promise, not a vow, not a performance of sincerity. Just yes, one word. Said the way he said everything, without hurry, without decoration, with the complete and specific weight of a man who understood that words were not cheap. She parked the car. She sat in it for a moment. She thought, this is going to get complicated. She thought it already is complicated. She thought you already knew that when you wrote your phone number on the back of that card. Then she got out of the car and walked up to her apartment and made tea. She didn't drink and stood at her kitchen window, looking at the city, and the drawing on her refrigerator caught the light from the street outside. The alley. Leo's careful lines. Her figure rendered slightly too tall, holding something that might have been a flashlight or might have been a bag. The moment before everything changed. She touched the corner of the paper. She thought, there's always a right answer, you just have to find it. She thought, I hope you're right, kid. She turned off the kitchen light. Outside, Naples was still going the way it always went, the way it had always gone, old and loud and completely indifferent to the decisions of individuals. But that was the thing about Naples. It was indifferent the way all cities were indifferent, which was to say, not actually indifferent at all, only enormous. Only larger than any one story. And inside that enormous old city, there was a woman who was beginning to understand something she hadn't expected to understand when she came here, and a man who was beginning to remember something he had almost stopped believing, and a child asleep with a telescope in his hands, who believed without question that there was always a right answer, and that the only requirement was the willingness to find it. Saturday came. The sky was clear, and the rings of Saturn were as promised extraordinary. The call came on a Wednesday morning, 6 weeks after the night Isabella found Leo in the alley. She was between patients, standing at the small desk in the back of the clinic, eating half a cornetto she'd bought at 7 and forgotten about until 9, when her phone lit up with Matteo's name. She answered immediately. That was new. 3 weeks ago, she would have let it ring once, assembled herself, then answered. Now she answered immediately and didn't analyze it. Something happened, he said. His voice was the controlled version, the one that sounded calm, the way a fist sounds calm when it's closed. Leo, she said. He's with me. He's fine. A pause that lasted exactly long enough to tell her it was not fine. But I need you to come to the villa tonight. Not for dinner. I need to tell you something. Isabella set down the cornetto. Tell me now. Not on the phone. Matteo. Tonight, he said. Please. She had never heard him say please before. Not like that. Not with the specific weight of a word that costs something. 7 o'clock, she said. Thank you. He ended the call. Isabella stood in the back of the clinic for a moment, with her phone in her hand and the half-eaten cornetto on the desk, and the particular stillness of a person who has just understood that the version of things she has been living in is about to become a previous version. She saw 4 more patients. She was present for all of them. She was good at that, the partitioning, the full attention that emergency medicine demanded, and that she had learned to produce even when something was running in the background of her mind, like an engine she couldn't turn off. But at 7 o'clock, she drove to the villa, and when Matteo opened the door, his face told her everything before he said a word. Leo was not at dinner. That was the first thing she noticed. His chair was empty, and his place was not set, and the villa had the particular quiet of a space a child usually occupies that is temporarily without him. "Where is he?" Isabella asked. "Maria took him to her sister's for the night." Matteo was standing near the window. Not sitting, standing with his hands at his sides in the posture of a man who has been rehearsing something and is now facing the moment of delivery. "I didn't want him here for this conversation." Isabella sat down at the table. She sat straight. Her hands were folded in front of her. "Tell me." He looked at her. Then he pulled out the chair across from her and sat, not with his usual deliberateness, but with something that was almost fatigue, the way people sit when they've been carrying something for too long. "Leo didn't fall," he said. The sentence went into the room, and the room changed around it. Isabella said, "What do you mean?" "The night you found him, in the alley." Matteo's voice was even and precise, the way voices are when precision is the only alternative to something worse. "He didn't fall. Someone put him there." The silence lasted 3 seconds. "Someone hurt him deliberately," Isabella said. "He saw something he shouldn't have." Matteo's jaw tightened. 3 weeks before that night, Leo was with me at a warehouse I use for distribution. I wasn't supposed to be there. He arrived early with my driver because his school let out at noon, and I forgot to tell the driver to take him directly home. He stopped, started again. There were men there, men from a family called Calabrese. They came to discuss a disagreement. Leo saw the conversation. He saw their faces. Isabella was very still. "What kind of disagreement?" "The kind that doesn't stay a conversation." She absorbed that. "So they hurt him, to warn you, to tell me they knew what he looked like." Matteo's voice dropped to something quiet and precise and very dangerous. "They put him in that alley so I would find him with another injury and understand exactly what they were capable of. So I would understand that my nephew was not untouchable just because I loved him." Isabella thought about Leo sitting against that wall, his back straight, his eyes enormous and still, not crying. "He already knew not to cry," she said. "Yes. Because something had already happened before that night." Matteo looked at her. "There was an incident 2 months before, a car that came too close. I told myself it was coincidental." He said it without self-forgiveness, just fact. "I was wrong." Isabella looked at the table. Her hands were still folded, but the knuckles had gone slightly pale. She noticed that and unclenched them deliberately. "Why didn't you tell me this when I found him?" she said. "Because you were a stranger." I stitched his arm. "I know. I was in a dark alley at 11 at night, and I stitched his arm, and you said 7 minutes, and you were there in 6. She stopped, steadied herself. "You knew that night what happened, and you didn't tell me." "I suspected. I didn't know." He held her gaze. "And I had no way to know who you were, whether you were what you appeared to be or something else." A pause. "People have approached me through softer vectors before." "You thought I might be—" She stopped. "You thought I was working for someone." "For 48 hours, yes. Then no." "What changed your mind?" "You wrote your personal number on the back of your card." He said it simply. "Someone who is working an angle doesn't give you a genuine point of contact. They give you something managed." He looked at her. "You gave me something real." Isabella sat with that for a moment. "And then you had dinner with us," she said. "And came back. And came back again." "Yes." "So all of it, the bookshop, the lunches, the telescope, all of it was real." His voice was certain, completely certain. Every moment of it was real Isabella. It was the first time he had used her first name without the title. She noticed it the way you notice a shift in atmospheric pressure, not dramatic, but absolute. "Tell me the rest," she said. He told her. The Calabrese family had been in conflict with the De Lucas for 11 years. Territory primarily, but also ideology. The Calabrese operated with a brutality that Matteo had refused to absorb into his own organization, and that refusal had been its own kind of statement. The conflict had been cold for 3 years, managed through intermediaries and the specific architecture of unspoken agreement that organized crime uses instead of law. Then 8 weeks ago, something changed. A shipment. An arrangement that fell through. Money that moved in a direction it wasn't supposed to move. The Calabrese sent a message. Leo was the message. "What do they want?" Isabella said. "They want access to the Port Authority contacts I've spent 12 years building. They want to use my infrastructure for their product." He said the word product the way you say a word when what it contains is too large and too ugly to say directly. I refused. They decided Leo was a more convincing argument than anything they could put in words. And now they're waiting to see if I reconsider. "Are you going to?" He looked at her. "No. Even though Leo, especially because of Leo." His voice was quiet and absolute. "If I give them what they want, they don't stop wanting. They expand. Everything I've kept out of my organization. The things that cross lines I will not cross. Everything walks in the door, and Leo grows up in the middle of it." He paused. "That answer is no. It was no before they made it personal. It's still no." Isabella looked at him for a long time. She thought about the version of this she'd known was there, but hadn't looked at directly. The careful voice on the phone calls. The men near the villa entrance. The way Leo sometimes watched the people around him with an attention that was wrong for his age. She thought about the drawing on her refrigerator. "What does this mean for him right now?" she said. "His actual safety tonight, tomorrow. He has protection I hadn't had before this conversation. The driver, 2 others rotating. Maria knows not to take him certain places. His school has been told not the full picture, but enough." He paused. "He is as safe as I can make him." "And is that safe enough?" Matteo was quiet for a moment. That cost him something. "I don't know," he said. She respected that more than any other answer he could have given. "Why are you telling me now?" she said. "Because you're in this house regularly. Because Leo talks about you every day. Because—" He stopped, looked at his hands, then back at her. "Because you told me you needed honesty. Always. Even when it was difficult." He held her gaze. "This is difficult." Isabella stood up. She walked to the window. She stood with her back to him for a moment, looking at the lights of Naples spread below, like something permanent and ancient, and completely unconcerned with the decisions of individual human beings. She thought about what it meant to be in this. What it had already meant without her having been told the full extent of it. She had already been in the car, already sat at this table, already had her phone number in this man's pocket. The question was not whether she was in it. The question was what she did now that she knew. She turned around. "You can't protect Leo by keeping him behind walls," she said. "I told you that once and I still believe it. But this is different." She crossed her arms. Not defensively, she knew the difference. Thinking. "This is an active threat from a specific source. That's not the same as the general danger of your world. That's a target." "Yes. So what's the plan, Matteo? Not for Leo in general. For this. For the Calabrese." He looked at her steadily. "I'm handling it." "That's not an answer. It's the answer I can give you right now. I need more than that. Isabella, I am not asking you to tell me the details of your operations," she said, and her voice was even and direct in the way it was when she was telling someone something they needed to hear whether or not they wanted to. "I am asking you whether Leo is going to be safer next week than he is tonight. That is a medical question as much as any other kind, and it is the only question I care about." A pause. Something shifted in his expression, not softness exactly, but a kind of recognition. The look of a person encountering something they needed to encounter. "He will be safer," Matteo said. "I am moving the resolution of this faster than I would have before because of him. Before I would have been patient. I would have waited, applied pressure, slowly allowed the situation to resolve on a longer timeline." He paused. "I am not being patient now." "Good," Isabella said. "You're not afraid," he said. It wasn't quite a statement. It had the shape of one, but the quality of something else. "I'm afraid," she said. "I'm afraid for Leo. I'm afraid for the position I'm in without having chosen it completely consciously. I am afraid of what it means that I'm standing in this room having this conversation." She looked at him. "I'm not performing calm. I'm using it. There's a difference." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I know. I've watched you use it for 6 weeks." She looked at him. "That's why I told you," he said quietly. "Because you don't break. Not because bad things can't reach you, but because when they do, you do something useful with them." He held her gaze. "I needed to tell someone the truth tonight, and you're the only person in my life who requires it." That sentence sat between them. Isabella sat back down at the table. "Okay," she said. "Then here is my truth in return." She looked at him directly. "I am not going to disappear from Leo's life because this is complicated. He needs consistency right now, more than he needs protection from reality. And I am not going to be another person who leaves." She said the last part plainly without sentiment, as statement of intent. "But I need you to tell me things. I need to know when the level of risk changes. I am not a person who manages well on incomplete information, and you need to understand that about me, if this, whatever this is going to work." Matteo was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen before. It took her a moment to identify it because she'd never seen it on his face. It was relief, not the explosive kind, the quiet kind, the kind that moves through a person slowly, like something very long held, finally being set down. "Understood," he said. "Say it back to me," she said. Not in one word. A pause. "Then, I will tell you when the risk changes. I will not manage what you know for your comfort or for mine. I will trust you with the truth because you have shown me you can use it." He held her gaze. "And if there is ever a moment where your being close to us makes you a target, rather than just aware of a target, I will tell you that too immediately, and I will not ask you to stay." Isabella nodded. "Good," she said. She stayed for dinner. Maria had left food. She always left food in the specific abundance of someone who believes that hot meals are a form of armor. And Isabella and Matteo ate at the table alone for the first time without Leo between them, as the animating center of every conversation, and it was different. Not uncomfortable. Different. The way things are different when the scaffolding comes down and you can see what the structure actually is. They talked about things they hadn't talked about before, about what Isabella really believed not professionally, but personally about people, and whether they could change. About what Matteo had seen over 20 years of watching people under pressure. About his father briefly, not warmly, but honestly. About Chicago winters, and why Isabella had never gone back after the engagement ended, and whether Naples had begun to feel like a place she could actually be. "Has it?" he said. She thought about it. "Yes," she said. "More every week." "Is that the city, or—" He stopped. She looked at him. "Both," she said. The word sat between them exactly the way his word had sat between them weeks ago in that room, taking up more space than it looked like it should. He didn't say anything. But something changed in his face that she understood. She found out about the Calabrese by accident, the way people find out about things they were never supposed to know, not through someone telling them, but through pieces assembling themselves in the wrong order. It was 2 days after the dinner. She was at the villa in the afternoon. Leo had asked her to come by after her shift because he had a theory about Saturn's orbit that he needed to present to someone who would engage with it seriously, and Matteo had sent her a message that said only, "He has a theory. Please come." She arrived to Leo's telescope and a hand-drawn diagram, and 40 minutes of the most concentrated astronomical argument she'd had since college, which was to say, ever. She lost the argument on orbital mechanics and won a sub-argument about observation methodology. And Leo accepted this outcome with great seriousness and went to find a book that would support his position. She was standing in the kitchen when she heard it. Not clearly, not a full conversation. Fragments through a partially open door. Mateo's voice lower than usual, and another voice she didn't know, and two names she caught distinctly through the gap. The first name, Calabrese. The second name, Romano. Her name. She stood very still. The other voice said something she couldn't parse. Mateo's voice came back controlled, careful, shorter sentences than usual. Then the door closed fully, and the voices disappeared. Isabella stood in the kitchen. Her name. In a conversation about the Calabrese. She thought about what that meant. She thought about the 6 weeks since the alley. She thought about all the moments she'd arrived at the villa and departed from it, and whether anyone had been watching, cataloging, noting the pattern. She thought about Mateo telling her, if there is ever a moment where your being close to us makes you a target, rather than just aware of a target, I will tell you that. I hadn't told her. Which meant either he didn't know yet, or he was managing it, or the thing she'd heard was not what she thought. She did not confront him immediately. That impulse she recognized and set aside. In medicine, you didn't act on incomplete information if you had 30 seconds to get more. She had more than 30 seconds. She waited until Leo went to bed. Then she looked at Mateo across the kitchen table and said, "Who was on the phone earlier? The call with the door half open." His expression shifted. Fast. He recovered it faster than most people would have noticed. She noticed. "A contact," he said. "A contact who mentioned my name." A stillness. "You heard that," he said. "I heard two things. Calabrese and Romano." She held his gaze. "You were going to tell me." "Yes." "When?" How was quiet for 1 second. "Tonight, after Leo was asleep." "I'm listening," she said. He told. The Calabrese had been watching the villa for longer than he'd realized. They had noted her presence, her car, her schedule, the frequency of her visits. They knew she was a doctor. They knew she was American. They knew her name. And 3 days ago, one of Mateo's contacts had intercepted a conversation in which the Calabrese discussed Isabella Romano as a potential point of leverage, not as a target for violence. Not yet. As information. As a shape of the situation that could be used. They knew Mateo De Luca was not a man moved by threats to himself. They knew Leo was the one thing that moved him, but Leo now had more protection than they could easily penetrate. They were looking for another angle. Isabella was the angle they were considering. She sat with that for a moment. "How serious is considering?" she said. "Serious enough that I have someone watching your building." She blinked. "Since when?" 4 days. "You have someone watching my building and you didn't tell me." "I was going to tell you tonight." "Mateo." Her voice was even. It took effort. "We had an agreement, 2 days ago, in this room. You looked at me and you said you would tell me when the risk changed, immediately." "I know." "You knew yesterday." "Yes." "And the day before." His jaw was tight. "I was trying to determine the level of credibility before I—" "No." She said it quietly but absolutely. "No. That's managing the information. That's deciding what I can handle and when. That's exactly what you promised me you wouldn't do." The silence between them was different from the silences before. Harder, more honest. "You're right," he said. "I know I'm right." She stood up. Not to leave, she was too measured for that, too deliberate. She stood because she needed to be vertical for what she was going to say next. "I understand why you do it. I understand that you have spent 20 years in a world where information is currency, and you control it by controlling who knows what and when. I understand that what looks like managing to me probably looks like protecting to you." She looked at him directly. "But I am not someone you protect by keeping in the dark. That is not protection. That is exactly the thing that puts me in more danger, because I can't make decisions I don't have the information to make." Mateo was looking at her with the expression she'd seen once before, the relief one underneath something more complicated. underneath what she now recognized as the specific pain of a man who knows he's done something wrong and can't argue his way out of it because the other person is right. "What do you need from me right now?" he said. "The truth. All of it. Not the version you've decided I can manage." He told her the rest. The contact believed the Calabrese conversation was still in the early consideration phase, which meant they had not yet committed to the Isabella angle, only identified it. The person watching her building would stay. Matteo would know within 72 hours whether the situation escalated or resolved. He had set in motion something that he described as a resolution. She did not ask him to elaborate on what that meant, and he did not elaborate. And they both understood that this was one of the specific places where her world and his world divided, and neither of them could cross the division without losing something essential about themselves. "I need you to do something for me," he said when he'd finished. "What?" "I need you to tell me if you want to step back." He said it directly. "No decoration. From this. From all of it. I will not think less of you. It will not change what I think of you in any way if you tell me that this is more than you chose and you need distance." Isabella looked at him. She thought about the cornetto she'd set down that morning when his voice told her something was wrong. She thought about driving to the villa at 7 o'clock because he'd said please. She thought about Leo asleep down the hall with his telescope. A child who believed in right answers and had already survived more wrong ones than most adults ever had to face. "I'm not stepping back," she said. "Isabella, I'm not stepping back," she said again, and her voice had the quality it had in the emergency room when she was making a call that wasn't going to be revisited. "But we are going to do this differently. I am not going to be a person who sits in your kitchen while men I've never met discuss me as a potential leverage point, and you decide when and how much to tell me about it. I will not be managed. I will not be protected by omission. I'm in this." She stopped, looked at him. "And I am in this, Matteo. Whatever I am in it as I am in it. Which means I am a person who knows what's happening and makes her own decisions with that knowledge. Not someone you make decisions for." The room was very quiet. Then Matteo De Luca, the man who had inherited 4 generations of a criminal empire and ran it with a calm that made powerful people lower their voices, looked at the woman across the table from him and said, "You're right, and I'm sorry." 3 words. Plain and direct and without qualification. Isabella nodded once. "Okay," she said. "Now tell me what I should actually know about my building that the person watching it knows." And he did. They were at the table until 1 in the morning. He told her things he had not told anyone, not about the Calabrese specifically, but about the architecture of his world, the way it worked, the places where it was predictable, and the places where it wasn't. Not because she asked for everything she didn't, and she was careful about what she asked, but because he had made a commitment and he was honoring it visibly, consciously. The way someone honors a commitment they know is going to cost them something. She told him things too. About the specifics of her schedule, her building, her habits. The practical information that the person watching her building already had, and that Matteo needed to have, so they could coordinate whatever came next. It was clinical and strange, and also underneath all of it, underneath the fear and the logistics and the very real weight of what they were navigating. It was intimate in the specific way that being honest with someone is always intimate. At 1 in the morning, she stood up to leave. "The person outside my building," she said. "What does he look like?" "Dark coat, late 50s. He reads." "He reads." "Yes. He finds it suspicious if he doesn't have something in his hands." Isabella thought about the man she'd seen twice this week near her building's entrance, sitting on the low wall with a paperback. She had noticed him. She had not thought twice about him because he looked like someone's grandfather waiting for someone's grandmother. "Tell him the coffee place on the corner opens at 6:30, she said. "If it's cold, he doesn't have to sit outside." Matteo looked at her for a moment. "I'll tell him," he said. She picked up her bag. "One more thing," she said. "Yes." She looked at him. "The night in the alley, when I called you, you asked where he was before you asked if he was okay." She held his gaze. "I've thought about that a lot. At the time I thought it meant you were practical, Now I understand it differently." She paused. "You knew something had happened to put him there. You already knew something was wrong. That's why you asked where instead of how." He was very still. "Yes," he said quietly. "I knew. You were already afraid." "Yes," she nodded. "That's the thing that keeps bringing me back," she said. "Not the villa, not the city, not any of it." She looked at him steadily. "That fear, the way you had it, the way it moved you." She paused. "That's real. Everything built on top of it may be complicated, but that is real." She walked out. In the car, she sat for a moment before starting the engine. She thought about her name in a conversation she wasn't supposed to hear. She thought about an old man with a paperback near her building entrance. She thought about everything she'd said tonight. The things she'd held firm on, the things she'd admitted. The place where her world and his world divided, and the place where they met. She thought this just became something different. She thought you knew it was going to. She started the car. Behind the villa's window, a light was still on. She drove home through Naples, and the city received her, the way it always received her, without ceremony, without judgment, with the ancient patience of something that has held too many stories to be surprised by any single one. And in the morning, there would be more to know. There always was. The 72 hours Matteo had mentioned passed like a held breath. Isabella counted them without meaning to. She saw patients. She answered messages. She ate meals she didn't taste. She slept in pieces 2 hours, then awake, then another hour and a half. And each time she woke, she lay still in the dark and listened to her building and thought about an old man with a paperback sitting on the wall outside and felt the specific cold of knowing that someone was watching the shape of her life and calculating what it was worth to them. On the morning of the third day, Matteo called. "It's resolved," he said. "The Calabrese. The consideration regarding you. They've moved away from that angle." His voice had the quality it had when he was being precise in order to be careful. "You are not currently a focus." Currently. She noted the word. "And Leo," she said. "The same as before. Protected. No escalation overnight." She exhaled. She hadn't realized how much she'd been holding until she let it go. "What does resolved mean?" she said. "Specifically." A pause. "It means someone communicated to the Calabrese that certain lines would carry consequences they were not positioned to absorb. You threatened them." "I communicated clearly," he said. "There's a distinction." "Is there? In this context, yes." Another pause. "Are you all right?" She thought about the past 72 hours. The broken sleep and the patience she'd seen through the background noise of her own fear, and the old man outside, who had she noticed on day 2, moved to the coffee shop on the corner exactly as she'd suggested. "I'm functional," she said. "That's not what I asked." She looked at the ceiling of her apartment. "No, I'm not entirely all right, but I'm going to be." She paused. "Are you?" A silence that lasted long enough to tell her the question had surprised him. "Yes," he said. "You don't sound certain." "I'm certain." A beat. "But I don't enjoy the position I put you in. I want you to know that." "I know," she said. "Come for dinner tonight. Bring Leo. I'll cook." A pause. "You cook?" "Don't say it like that." "I'm not saying it like anything." "You absolutely are." She sat up. 7 o'clock. Don't be early. I was there at 6:58, which she decided to interpret as not early. Leo ate 2 portions of the pasta she made and declared it different from his uncle's, in a way that was clearly meant to be diplomatic, and landed instead as the most honest food criticism she'd ever received. Matteo ate his portion without comment, and then when Leo went to look at the drawing on her refrigerator and catalog the changes in its environment since his last visit, Matteo said quietly, "It's good. Better or worse than yours?" "Different," he said. Leo was being accurate. He's always accurate. "Yes." Matteo looked across the kitchen at his nephew, who was now examining her bookshelf with the intensity of a person conducting an official inventory. "He told me this morning that he likes it here." "At my apartment." He said it feels like the kind of place where someone actually lives. He looked at her. I told him that was because you actually live. Isabella looked at him. He said you were the most real person he'd met since his mother, Matteo said quietly. The sentence arrived without warning and went somewhere deep. She looked down at the table for a moment, then back at him. He told you that, this morning, at breakfast, between one topic and another, the way he does things. Matteo's voice was steady, but something in it was not quite steady. He said she used to talk to him the way you do, like the question matters as much as the answer. Isabella was quiet. He misses her every day, Matteo said. He doesn't talk about it often, but I know. I know you know, she said. He looked at her. How? Because you watch him the way someone watches a person they're trying to protect from something they can't protect them from. She held his gaze. Grief is the one thing you cannot stand between him and you know it. And it costs you something every day. Matteo was very still. From the other room, Leo said, You have 6 books about medicine and 1 book about stars. You should have more books about stars. Noted, Isabella called back. I'll make a list. Please don't, she said. I'm going to, Leo said with complete serenity. Matteo was still looking at her. The expression on his face had done the thing she'd first seen in the alley, that shift, that recalibration. Except now, she understood it better. It was what happened to his face when something reached him that he wasn't prepared to be reached by. Isabella, he said. Yes. He started to say something. Stopped. The stopping was visible, a very controlled person encountering the edge of what control could manage. Thank you, he said finally, for not leaving. After everything I told you. I told you I wasn't leaving. People say things. He looked at his hands briefly, then back at her. Actions are what I trust. You stayed. That matters more than I can properly. He stopped again. It matters. From the other room. Uncle Matteo. She has a book you said was a disappointment, and she has it on the top shelf, which means she likes it. Matteo closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. Isabella pressed her lips together to keep from laughing. She failed. The sound of her laughing made something happen in Matteo's face that she had not seen before, and that she found she wanted to keep seeing. The third act was weak, he said. It was surprising, she said. You've read it twice, Leo announced from the other room. There are 2 creases on the spine. Leo, Matteo said. I'm just saying she liked it. Go count something that isn't in this apartment. There's nothing to count. A pause. Can I look at your telescope? It's in the closet, Isabella said. Which closet? The one in the hall. The sound of a closet opening. Then, you have a lot of coats. It's a big closet. This is a good telescope, Leo said with the authority of a person who owns a better one and is being gracious about it. Matteo looked at Isabella. She looked at him. The kitchen was warm, and the food was on the table, and Leo was in the hallway cataloging her belongings with complete confidence, and something about all of it. The ordinary specific weight of it landed on Isabella with a clarity she hadn't expected. This is what she'd come back to Naples for. Not this specifically. Not this man, this child, this particular complicated shape of a life. But this feeling of being somewhere that was genuinely hers, of existing in a place that had texture and weight and stakes that were real. Her father had talked about Naples for 40 years. He had said, "You'll understand when you go." She had nodded and half believed him and not gone. Now she understood. She stood up to clear the table, and Matteo stood at the same moment to help, and they were both reaching for the same bowl, and their hands were both on it at the same time, and neither of them let go. They stood like that for a moment. The kitchen was very quiet, except for Leo making a small sound of appreciation in the hallway at something he'd found in the closet. Matteo's hand was over hers on the bowl. She looked up. He was already looking at her. "I need to tell you something else," he said. "Now," she said. "Yes." He set the bowl down. His hand stayed near hers. "Now." She waited. "My father," he said. "There is something about my father's history that I learned something recently. Something I should have looked for sooner and didn't, because there are things you don't examine when examining them costs too much. He paused. It involves your family. The word family in his mouth in that sentence with that weight. Isabella felt the temperature of the room change. Tell me, she said. 26 years ago, De Luca Matteo's father. The man who had built the De Luca organization into what Matteo inherited had been in conflict with a rival group operating in the port district of Naples. The conflict involved territory, and it involved money, and it involved the specific ugliness that organized crime conflicts always involved when they went from cold to hot. A fire. In a building in the port district. A warehouse that had been used by the rival group and that Carmine De Luca's men had targeted during a confrontation that was supposed to be empty. It wasn't empty. 3 people were inside. Workers who weren't supposed to be there, who had stayed late, whose presence was not known and not checked for. 2 of them survived. 1 did not. His name was Enzo Romano, Isabella's father's younger brother. Her uncle whom she had never met, who had died before she was born, whom her father had spoken of only twice in her lifetime, each time briefly, and with a grief so old it had become structural part of the architecture of who he was, rather than something he carried separately. Her father had left Naples the year after his brother died. He had gone to America. He had not come back. Isabella stood in her kitchen and listened to Matteo tell her this, and the world rearranged itself around the information, the way worlds do when something fundamental shifts not dramatically, not loudly, but completely, like a lens correcting. When he finished, the kitchen was silent. "How long have you known?" she said. 8 days. His voice was even, careful. I had been piecing together the history of that period. There were gaps in what I knew about my father's operations in the 90s. Things. He didn't document things I didn't look for, because I didn't need to, and because some gaps are easier than their contents. He paused. When I started understanding who you were, your father, your history, why you'd come back, I had a contact look into the Romano name in Naples. It took him 4 days. "You've known for 8 days, she said. "Yes." She looked at him. "And you told me tonight?" "Yes." "Not immediately." "No." He held her gaze. "I needed to understand the full picture first. I needed to be certain. And I needed—" He stopped. "I was afraid." She had never heard him say that word about himself before. He had said it about Leo, about losing the people he loved, never about himself. "Of what?" she said. "That this would be the thing that ended it." His voice was quiet, precise. "Everything else, the danger, the complexity, the world I live in, you have looked at all of it and stayed. But this is different. This is not the world I live in being complicated. This is my family being directly responsible for a specific grief in yours." He held her gaze. "I needed you to know. I was also afraid of what would happen when you did." Isabella turned away from him. She walked to the window of her kitchen. She stood there and looked at the city and thought about her father. Not the version of him that was memory and story and the softened accumulation of years, but the specific man. The way he went quiet when someone mentioned Naples at the wrong moment. The way he'd said his brother's name Enzo only twice, always with the same brief pause after, like the word required recovery. He had left this city because of a fire, because of a man named Carmine De Luca. And she had come back to this city and found herself standing in his son's kitchen. She pressed her palm flat against the wall near the window, just to feel something solid. From the hall, Leo called, "Is everything okay?" Neither of them answered immediately. "Yes," Isabella said. Her voice came out steady. She was good at steady. "Give us a few minutes, Leo." A pause. Then, with the particular sensitivity of a child who has learned to read the temperature of rooms very accurately. "Okay." His footsteps moved away. Isabella stood at the window. She thought about what it meant to hate something, and what it meant to grieve something, and whether those were always different. She thought about her father saying, "You'll understand when you go." She thought about whether he'd meant the city or something else. Something he hadn't been able to say directly. She thought about Matteo at 8 years old, knowing whatever an 8-year-old knows about what his father does, which is always more than the adults believe, and less than the full picture. She thought about inherited legacies and the difference between inheriting something and choosing it, and how often those two things were confused. She thought about Matteo telling her, "I didn't choose it the way you choose a career. You're born into this." She turned around. I was standing exactly where she'd left him. He had not moved, had not tried to fill the silence, had not managed the moment. He was just standing there waiting with the look of a man who has said the true thing and is now completely at the mercy of what comes next. "Did your father know," she said, "that there were people inside?" Matteo's jaw was tight. "I don't know," he said. "I will never know. He died without it was not something he discussed." "But you think he might have known?" A pause that answered the question without words. "Yes," he said quietly. "I think he might have." "And you," she said. "What do you do with that?" "I carry it." He said it simply. "I cannot undo it. I cannot apologize on behalf of a man who never apologized himself. I can tell you that when I found out, the first thing I did was go and sit in my car for an hour because I didn't know what else to do. And that the second thing I did was decide to tell you, even though it might cost me everything I've—" He stopped. "Everything." Isabella looked at him. "She thought you went and sat in your car for an hour. She thought my father sat in silence for 40 years. She thought about what grief does to people across time, how it shapes them, how it moves through families, like water through stone-wearing channels that look like character but are actually wound. Her father's quietness, his specific ache for a city he never returned to, his death 2 years ago with the name Enzo said only twice in her hearing, and probably 1,000 times in his own. She said, 'You are not your father.'" Matteo looked at her. "You are not responsible for what he did," she said. "You were a child, and you are the man who told me this 8 days after he found out, even though he was afraid, is not the same man who built something on the wreckage of other people's lives without looking at what he was building on." She held his gaze. "I am not going to hold you accountable for Carmine De Luca's choices. That's not justice. That's just transferring pain." "Isabella," "But," she said, and her voice was firm, "I need you to do something. Anything. I need you to help me find out what happened to Enzo. The full picture. Not what the family history says, not the version that's been smoothed down to be livable. The actual truth." She looked at him. "My father carried this his whole life without knowing all of it. He's gone. I can't give it to him. But I can know it, and I need to know it." She paused. "Can you do that?" Matteo's expression was the one she'd seen before, but more fully now, the relief underneath the weight, both of them present and real. "Yes," he said. "I will find everything. All of it, even the parts that make your father worse." "All of it," he said. She nodded. She stood there for a moment longer. Then she said, "Leo is going to come out of that hallway in approximately 90 seconds, because that's how long his patience lasts when he thinks something important is happening." Something shifted at the corner of Matteo's mouth. 60 seconds, he said. "I say 45, Leo announced from the hallway. "Because I counted." Matteo closed his eyes. Isabella exhaled, not quite a laugh, but the shape of one. "Come out, Leo." Leo appeared in the kitchen doorway with her telescope under his arm and the expression of a person who has been waiting for exactly this permission. He looked at Isabella, then at Matteo. He was very good at reading rooms. "Is it okay?" he said. "Yes," Isabella said. "Come sit down." He came and sat down and put the telescope carefully on the table and looked between them one more time with his mother's eyes. "Uncle Matteo told you something hard," Leo said. It was not a question. Neither of them answered immediately. "Yes," Isabella said. "Are you still coming back?" Leo said. His voice was steady. It cost him something to make it steady. She could hear the cost. She looked at him. At the child who had been in that alley with his back straight and his arm bleeding and his eyes enormous and still, who had learned not to flinch from things that deserved flinching, from who had lost both his parents, and organized his grief into clean lines. The way he organized everything, because clean lines were what you had when everything else was uncertain. "I'm still coming back," she said. Leo nodded. Something in his posture released a fraction barely visible but there. "Good," he said. Then because he was Leo, and this was how he moved from hard things to necessary things. "Can we look at Saturn? The atmospheric conditions are favorable." Matteo looked at Isabella. She looked at him. "Get your coat," she said to Leo. They went up to the roof of Isabella's building. She had access. The landlord had given her a key in the first week because she'd helped his wife with a medication question, and he was a man who believed in reciprocal kindness, and Leo set up the telescope with the brisk efficiency of someone who had done this many times, and the sky above Naples was cold and clear and very full. Leo found Saturn in under 2 minutes. He stepped back and let Isabella look first. She put her eye to the telescope and saw at the rings exactly as promised. Clear and slightly tilted and absolutely real in the specific way that real things are when you've known them only as pictures and then suddenly they are there, present, actual, asking nothing of you except attention. "Oh," she said quietly. "I know," Leo said beside her. She stepped back. Matteo looked. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Yes." "Is that all you can say?" Leo demanded. "It's a very large planet," Matteo said. "It's the second largest planet in the solar system, and the rings are made of ice and rock, and they're approximately 175,000 miles wide." Leo paused for breath. "That's just yes." "It's an emphatic yes," Matteo said. Leo made a sound of profound tolerance. Isabella was watching Matteo. He was looking through the telescope again, and something on his face in that moment, the cold air and the small circular view of something enormous and ancient and indifferent and beautiful, was the most unguarded she had seen him. Like a man briefly set down from himself. He stepped back and looked at her. The roof was cold. The city was below them. Leo was already repositioning the telescope with a new destination in mind and narrating the move in real time. "I have to ask you something," Matteo said quietly enough that Leo couldn't hear. "Ask," she said. "Why did you come here really? Not the professional version. Not the thing you tell the clinic and the non-profit." He held her gaze. "Why Naples? Why now?" She thought about it. Not long she knew the answer. She'd known it for weeks. She'd just been waiting to say it to the right person at the right time. "My father talked about this city his whole life," she said. "And when he was gone I kept feeling like there was a conversation we never finished. Like he'd been trying to tell me something about who he was, where he came from, and I'd been listening but not quite hearing it." She paused. "I came here to finish listening." Matteo was very still. "And," he said, "and I'm starting to understand what he was saying." She looked at the city, all of it, the light and the noise and the oldness of it, the 1,000 layers of who had been here before. He wasn't just homesick. He left something here. Not just his brother. Himself. A version of himself that he couldn't carry to America. And I think he needed someone to come back for it. She looked at Matteo. "I don't know if that makes sense." "It makes complete sense," he said. "Jupiter," Leo announced. "Give me 4 minutes." Neither of them moved. They stood on the roof in the cold, and the city was below them, and the sky was above them, and Leo was 4 feet away, narrating his search for Jupiter, with the focused pleasure of someone doing exactly what they were supposed to be doing. Matteo said, "I want to say something to you." "Say it," she said. "I have been careful for a very long time about what I let myself want." His voice was low and precise. Careful in the specific way of someone who understands that wanting things creates vulnerabilities, and vulnerabilities get used. That is not paranoia. In my world, that is simply true. He paused. "I have not let myself want something that was not Leo's well-being, or the stability of what I manage in a very long time." She waited. "I want this," he said, not gesturing, not qualifying, just saying it plainly to her face. "Whatever this is, you in Leo's life, you in mine, whatever shape that takes, I want it to continue." He held her gaze. "And I'm telling you that directly, Because you told me you need honesty always, and this is the truest thing I know how to say right now." Isabella looked at him. She thought about the cornetto she'd set down when he called. The 6 minutes instead of 7. The drawing on her refrigerator. 8 days of knowing something terrible and choosing to tell her anyway. She thought about her father's city receiving her like something remembered. She said, "This is going to be complicated." "Yes," he said. "There are going to be things about your world that I can't accept and that we're going to have to navigate." "I know. And there are going to be moments where I push back and you think you're protecting me, and we're going to fight about it." "Almost certainly. And the thing with my uncle that doesn't go away. That stays in this. We carry it." "We carry it," he said. "Together, if you'll let me." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Found Jupiter yet, Leo?" 40 seconds, Leo said. 40. "When he's done with Jupiter," she said to Matteo, "you're going to tell him that you're going to try very hard to be someone worth the life he deserves. Not to him. To me. So I can watch your face when you say it." Matteo was quiet for a moment. "All right," he said. "And I'm going to tell him that I plan to stay in Naples." Something moved through Matteo's face, full and real and uncontrolled, for exactly 1 second before he brought it back. But she saw it. She was meant to see it. "Jupiter," Leo said. "Come and look." They came and looked. The planet was enormous in the eyepiece, banded and absolute, its moons visible as 4 faint points of light arranged in a line. Leo said, "Galileo discovered those moons in 1610. He was the first person to see them." "What did he think?" Isabella asked. Leo considered. "I think he thought, now I know something I didn't know before." He looked up at her. "That's what I think anyway." Isabella looked at him, then at Matteo, standing on the other side of the telescope, with his hands in his jacket pockets and his face turned toward the sky. She thought, now I know something I didn't know before. She thought that's exactly right. The cold settled around the three of them on the roof of a building in Naples. At 11 o'clock at night, a doctor from Chicago, a man carrying 4 generations of complicated legacy and a child with his mother's eyes, who believed without reservation that there was always a right answer, and that the universe was mostly made of things worth finding. The city was below them. The sky was above. And in the space between, something was being decided, not loudly, not formally, not with the drama of declaration, but in the quiet, irrevocable way that real things are decided. One honest sentence at a time, one true moment after another, until there were enough of them to build something on. 3 months after the night on the roof, Matteo De Luca did something that Naples had not seen a man in his position do in 40 years. He walked away from a deal. Not a small deal. Not a peripheral arrangement that could be restructured or reassigned. The Falcone Group had approached him with a proposition that would have doubled the De Luca organization's port revenue. Inside 18 months, legitimate revenue wrapped around illegitimate infrastructure. The kind of layered arrangement that had been standard practice for 3 generations of his family. The kind of deal his father would have signed before the other man finished the sentence. Matteo said no. He said it in a room with 4 other men, all of whom had expected yes, and he said it without explanation and without apology. And he said it the way he said everything, without hurry, without the performance of difficulty. And then he left the room. He drove to the clinic. He sat in his car outside for 11 minutes. Isabella knew because she saw the car from the window, and she waited, and she did not go out, because she had learned by now when he needed time and when he needed her to come to him, and what the difference looked like from a second-floor window. At 11 minutes he got out of the car. She met him at the clinic door. I didn't say anything immediately. He looked at her the way he'd been looking at her for 3 months, like she was a coordinate he navigated by. I turned down the Falcone deal, he said. She had not known about the Falcone deal. He told her now briefly the shape of it, what it would have meant, what his father would have done. When he finished, she said, "How do you feel?" He considered the question with the seriousness he gave everything. "Like I put something down that was very heavy," he said, "and I keep reaching for it by habit and finding my hands empty." "Is empty bad?" "No," he said. After a moment, No. It's just new. She looked at him steadily. Leo's going to need to know someday. Not everything, but the direction of it. That things are changing. I know. He'll ask questions. He always asks questions. Good ones. The most inconvenient ones, Matteo said, which in his voice was a form of love. She touched his arm briefly, the specific grounded contact of someone who is present and means it. Then she went back inside because she had patience, and he went back to whatever the day required of him, and that was how it worked between them. No ceremony, no performance, just the steady accumulation of real moments one after another, which was the only way anything true ever got built. The information about Enzo Romano arrived on a Tuesday morning in a manila envelope delivered to the villa. Matteo called Isabella before he opened it. I have it, he said. She knew immediately what he meant. I'm coming. You don't have to. I'm coming, she said. She was there in 20 minutes. Leo was at school. The villa was quiet in the particular way it was quiet when it was just the two of them. A different quality of silence, one she'd grown to know as its own kind of language. Matteo put the envelope on the table between them. He didn't open it. He waited. She picked it up. She opened it herself. The report inside was 12 pages. Matteo's contact had been thorough, not in the sensational way of a person constructing a narrative, but in the methodical way of someone assembling documented fact. Dates, locations, names, testimonies from people who had been there, or known people who had been there. Official records that had been quietly filed and quietly forgotten. A photograph, small and slightly blurred, of three men in front of a warehouse. One of them young, dark-haired, grinning at something outside the frame. She recognized the grin before she recognized the face. It was her father's grin. Same corner of the mouth. Same particular angle of pleasure, unself-conscious and complete. Enzo Romano was 23 years old in the photograph. He was dead 7 months later. She read the report. Matteo sat across from her and was quiet and did not look at her face and did not try to manage the moment. He let her have it completely, which was the right thing, which she understood even as she was inside it. The facts were these. Carmine De Luca had ordered the warehouse action, knowing there was a probability of occupancy. Not certainty, his men had reported the building as empty, after a check that was the report indicated not thorough enough. But the probability had been raised, and Carmine had decided the probability was acceptable. He had decided the probability was acceptable. That sentence. Isabella sat with it. She thought about her father leaving Naples the year after. She thought about the word Enzo said twice in a lifetime, and the silence after each time. She thought about 40 years of ache that looked like homesickness, but was actually something more specific. The grief of a man who had lost his brother, and then lost his city, and then spent 4 decades in a country that was not his, trying to build a life large enough to live in, despite the shape of what was missing. She set the report down. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, he knew there was a chance. Yes, Matteo said. And he decided the chance was worth it. Yes. She looked at the photograph, at the grin that was her father's grin on a younger face. Enzo was 23, she said. Yes. My father was 26. She paused. He never talked about it as anger. When he mentioned it the 2 times, it was grief. Pure grief. No rage. She looked up at Matteo. I used to think that meant he'd forgiven whatever happened. Now I think he just never knew enough to be angry. He thought it was an accident. Matteo held her gaze. I'm sorry, he said. And like the first time he'd said it months ago in that clinic room. It had the weight of something understood from the inside, rather than performed from the outside. I know you are, she said. What do you need? She thought about it. A real answer, not the reflexive one, not the managed one. What did she actually need right now in this room with these 12 pages and this photograph? I need to sit here for a while, she said, and I need you to stay. I'm not going anywhere, he said. She picked up the photograph again. She looked at her uncle's face for a long time. The grin that was her father's grin. The youth of him 23, which was so young, which was younger than she felt capable of even imagining now. The particular completeness of someone who doesn't know what's coming. She thought I came back to Naples to finish a conversation. She thought this is part of it. She thought Dad. I found him. I found what you carried. She set the photograph down carefully, face up. She didn't put it back in the envelope. She left it on the table where she could see it. Tell me something about this city, she said to Matteo. Something that has nothing to do with your family or mine. Something good. I thought for a moment. There is a bakery in the Quartiere Spagnoli that has been run by the same family for 112 years, he said. The grandmother still comes in at 4 in the morning. She's 87. She says if she stops coming in at 4 in the morning, she'll die, and her family believes her, so they let her. Do they make good bread? The best bread in Naples. Take me there sometime. Saturday, he said. She nodded. They sat together in the quiet villa for another hour, and outside the city went on doing what it always did. Old and loud and indifferent and full. And on the table between them, a photograph of a 23-year-old man sat face up in the light. The confrontation with the Calabrese came 6 weeks later. Not the way Isabella had feared it would come. Not with violence against Leo. Not with her name in another overheard conversation. It came in the way that certain kinds of confrontations come when one side has been preparing and the other side has been watching the preparation without fully believing it. Matteo had been building towards something for months. He had made calls and arrangements and communications through the layers of his world that she didn't have full access to and didn't ask for. She knew the direction. She knew the intent. She trusted the intent because she had watched him make it real in small ways, consistently over time. The Falcone deal, other decisions, the gradual reorganization of what the De Luca name was willing to attach itself to. The morning it happened, Leo was at school. Isabella was at the clinic. Matteo sent her a message at 9:47 that said, "Today. Stay at the clinic until I call." She read it 3 times. She saw 5 patients. She did not stay at the clinic. She told herself she was going to the cafe on the corner. She went to the cafe on the corner. She sat there for 40 minutes with a coffee she didn't drink and her phone face up on the table, and then she went back to the clinic and she saw 2 more patients, and she was present for both of them completely, because that was what she did. She was always present for the people in front of her. Even when something else was running in the background, like an engine, she couldn't turn off. He called at 2 in the afternoon. "It's done," he said. She exhaled. "Leo. At school. Fine. He doesn't know anything happened." "Are you hurt?" A pause. "No." "Matteo. Are you hurt?" "There's a cut on my forearm. It's not serious. I've had worse." "Come to the clinic." "Isabella. Come to the clinic," she said. "Now. I mean it." He came. The cut was 4 inches long and needed 6 stitches, and was absolutely not serious in the clinical sense, and she stitched it in complete silence, with the focused precision she used when she needed her hands to do the steady work while the rest of her was somewhere else. When she finished, she pressed the bandage down with 2 fingers and held it there for a moment longer than necessary. Then she said, "What happened to the Calabrese?" "They're going to withdraw," he said, "from Naples, from everything adjacent to the De Luca territory." The negotiation was persuasive. "Did anyone die?" He looked at her. "No." She absorbed that. That was a choice. "Yes." "Your father would have made a different choice." "Yes," he said again. Same weight, different meaning. She looked at his arm. At the bandage she'd just put there, which was clean and tight and good. 6 stitches. Her work. The same count as Leo's arm 8 months ago in a narrow alley in the rain. She thought it started with 7 stitches, and now it's 6. She thought that's probably not meaningful. She thought it feels meaningful anyway. "Leo needs to know," she said. "Not the details, but the direction. That things are different now than they were a year ago. That you're different. I know." "He's 12, she said. "He understands more than you let yourself believe he does." "He understands everything," Matteo said quietly. "That's exactly why it's hard." She looked at him. "He's going to be proud of you." Matteo was very still. "You don't know that," he said. I know him, she said. He's going to be proud of you. And it's going to embarrass you, and you're going to say something deflecting, and he's going to see straight through it and persist until you accept it. She paused. I'm looking forward to watching. Something happened in Mateo's face, full and real and briefly completely unguarded. You're staying for dinner, he said. Obviously, she said. She told Leo that evening. Not everything. The shape of it, that his uncle had handled something difficult today, that he'd handled it differently than the people before him would have, that it mattered, and Leo should know it mattered. Leo listened with his full attention. Then he looked at Mateo. You got hurt, he said. He had noticed the bandage on Mateo's arm the moment they walked in and had said nothing and waited, which was very Leo, the patience of someone who knows the information will come if he gives it room. A small cut, Mateo said. Dr. Isabella stitched it. Yes. Leo looked at Isabella, then back at Mateo, then at the bandage. How many stitches? He said. 6, Isabella said. Leo nodded slowly. He was quiet for a moment, the thinking kind of quiet, the kind where you could almost hear the processing. Then he said, Mine were 7. Yes, Isabella said. So yours are less than mine. Correct, Mateo said. Leo looked at his uncle with an expression that was 12 years old and also very old, the expression of a child who has been through enough to know what things cost and who recognizes cost in other people. Okay, he said. Then, I'm going to make coffee. Dr. Isabella taught me how. Mateo looked at Isabella. She looked at him. You taught him to make coffee, he said. He asked. I taught. She paused. He's very precise about it. Of course he is, Mateo said. From the kitchen, the sound of Leo moving with focused purposefulness, the specific sounds of a child who has been given a task he intends to perform correctly. Mateo was quiet for a moment, then very quietly. He said okay. He did, Isabella said. That's all he said. That's all he needed to say. She looked at him. He's 12, Mateo. He grew up watching you. He knows what okay costs you. And he said it. Mateo turned his face away from her for a moment. She let him have that moment completely, the same way he had let her have her hour with the photograph and the 12-page report. She waited. When he turned back, his face was composed. But his eyes had something in them she hadn't seen before, something she was glad to see, something that told her the walls were not infinite. He's going to be all right, she said. I know, Mateo said. And this time, he said it the way people say true things when they have finally stopped just hoping them. The coffee was excellent. The city started to notice around the 4th month, not dramatically. Naples had seen too much across too many centuries to be dramatic about incremental change. But people talked, they had always talked, and what they talked about now was different from what they had talked about before. The De Luca name had always meant something in this city. Power. Reach. The specific atmosphere of a presence that was never quite visible, but always felt. That remained. But the texture of the stories began to shift. A community clinic in the Port District received an anonymous donation large enough to fund a full renovation and 2 years of additional staff. The clinic director, speaking to a local journalist, said only that the funds came through a foundation with no named principals, and that she had decided not to ask too many questions about a gift that was going to save lives. A school in the Quartiere Spagnoli, the neighborhood where Mateo's father had grown up, where Carmine De Luca had learned what power was for by watching it used wrong, received a mathematics laboratory. New computers. A part-time teacher funded for 3 years. When Leo found out about the mathematics laboratory, he looked at his uncle across the dinner table with the expression of someone who has solved a problem they didn't know they were working on. That's the school near Nonna's old building, Leo said. Yes, Mateo said. You did that. A foundation did that. Uncle Mateo. Leo's voice had its most patient tone, the one reserved for occasions when adults were being technically accurate in ways that missed the point. You did that. A pause. Yes, Mateo said. Leo nodded. He ate his pasta. After a moment, Mama would have liked that. The table was very quiet. Yes, Matteo said. She would have. Leo put down his fork. He looked at his uncle with his mother's eyes direct complete, asking nothing except honesty. Is it getting better? He said. The things you're changing. Is it actually getting better, or is it just different? Matteo held his nephew's gaze. Isabella held her breath. It's getting better, Matteo said. Slowly. And not in a straight line. And there are things I cannot change, and things I will have to carry regardless. He paused. But the direction is better. I can tell you that with certainty. Leo looked at him for a long moment. Then, okay, he said again, and picked up his fork. And the word had the same weight. It had the evening of the bandage, the specific weight of acceptance that doesn't require explanation or elaboration, because it comes from someone who already knows the full cost of the thing being accepted. Isabella looked at the two of them across the table and felt something she hadn't felt since before her father died. The particular quality of belonging to a moment completely without the part of her mind that was always halfway to the next problem, or the next patient, or the next necessary thing. She was entirely here. This table, this city, these people. She picked up her wineglass. Leo, she said, I have something to tell you. He looked at her immediately. Alert. Ready. This was Leo, he was always ready. I've decided to stay in Naples, she said. Not temporarily, not for the nonprofit's timeline. I'm applying for a permanent position at the community hospital in the Port District. She paused. I'm staying. Leo put down his fork for the second time. He looked at Matteo. Matteo was looking at Isabella. You didn't tell me, Matteo said. His voice was very even, carefully even. I'm telling you now, she said. When did you decide? Tuesday, she said. When I was sitting at the cafe, not staying at the clinic the way you told me to. Something moved across his face. Exasperation, and something else. Something warmer. Something that had no clean name. You didn't stay at the clinic, he said. I stayed at the cafe. That is not the same thing. It's adjacent. Isabella. I submitted the application from the cafe, she said. On my phone, between the coffee I didn't drink and going back to see my 2 o'clock patient. She looked at him steadily. I decided that if today resolved the way I hoped it would resolve, I was staying, and it did. So I am. The table was very quiet. Then Leo said, I knew. Both of them looked at him. I knew you were going to stay, he said. You put my drawing on the refrigerator the same night you got it. People who are leaving don't put things on their refrigerator. He paused with great dignity. I've been knowing since the beginning. Matteo looked at Isabella. He's been knowing since the beginning, Matteo said. He's very perceptive, Isabella said. He gets it from his mother. And from you, she said. Matteo was quiet. Then across the table with Leo between them and Naples outside, and the evening settling into the particular quality of Naples' evenings that she had come to love, warm and old, and full of voices, he said, thank you. Just that. 2 words. Without elaboration, without the performance of what they contained, because he was a man who understood that the truest things needed the least scaffolding. You're welcome, she said. Leo picked up his fork for the 3rd time. Can we have the good gelato after dinner to celebrate? What are we celebrating? Matteo said. Dr. Isabella staying, Leo said as though this were obvious. And your arm healing, and the mathematics laboratory. He considered. And Saturn. We never properly celebrated Saturn. We looked at it, Isabella said. Looking is not celebrating, Leo said firmly. Matteo looked at Isabella. The good gelato, she said. The good gelato, he agreed. They went to the bakery in the Quartiere Spagnoli that Saturday, the one that had been run by the same family for 112 years. The Grand 87. Small, with hands that moved with the authority of someone who has performed the same motions 10,000 times and intends to perform them. 10,000 more came out from the back when Matteo arrived and spoke to him in the rapid Neapolitan dialect that Isabella was still learning. And whatever she said made Matteo look briefly young, in the way people look young when they are being seen by someone who knew them before they became what they became. The bread was extraordinary, They stood on the street eating it, the three of them in the neighborhood where Carmine DeLuca had grown up, and where a mathematics laboratory now had new computers, and a funded teacher in the city, where a 23-year-old man had died 40 years ago, and his older brother had left and never come back in the specific corner of the world that had been waiting patient and old and full, always full, for the stories moving through it, to find their way toward something better than what they'd been. Leo was eating with both hands and narrating something about the history of leavened bread in ancient Egypt, which he had apparently researched on the walk over. Matteo was listening with his full attention, the way he always listened to Leo, not indulgently, not absently, but really listening, storing the information, because this was the person who mattered most, and what mattered most deserved the most attention. Isabella was watching both of them. She thought about what it meant to arrive somewhere. Not to visit, not to pass through, not to be present temporarily on the way to somewhere else. To arrive. To put things on the refrigerator. To submit applications from cafes on important afternoons. To stay. Her father had told her she would understand when she went. She understood. She took a piece of bread. She looked at the city. Her city now, or beginning to be, and thought about a rainy alley, and a bleeding child, and a phone call, and a voice that asked where before it asked how. She thought about 7 stitches, and then 6. She thought about telescope eyepieces and Jupiter's moons, and 12 pages of documented truth sitting on a table between two people who had decided that truth, however hard, was the only foundation worth building on. She thought about her father's grin on a 23-year-old face in a blurry photograph. She thought, I came here to finish a conversation. She thought, I think it's finished. She thought, and something else has started. You're being quiet, Leo said. He had finished narrating ancient Egypt and was now observing her with his full diagnostic attention. I'm thinking, she said. About what? She looked at him. At the child who had been in that alley with his arm bleeding and his back straight and his eyes enormous and completely still, who had learned not to flinch from things that deserved flinching, from who had lost the 2 people who should have been the floor of his world, and had rebuilt that floor out of mathematics and telescopes, and the careful love of a man who was trying every day to be worth the life his nephew deserved. She thought about what she'd told him months ago in a clinic room when she'd pulled the sutures from his arm. I'm thinking about right answers, she said. Leo nodded seriously. Did you find one? She looked at Matteo. He was looking at her. The city was behind him, and the bakery was behind her, and Leo was between them, eating bread, and the morning was bright and old and completely alive, and Naples patient, ancient, beautiful, scarred, full, held all of it, the way it had always held everything, without judgment, without ceremony, with the simple, enormous fact of continuity. Yes, Isabella Romano said. I found one. And she had. She had come to Naples for her father, and stayed for herself, and found in the space between those 2 things, a life she had not known she was looking for, complicated and real and rooted in truth, rather than comfort, built on honest conversation, and the specific courage of people who chose every day to be more than the worst thing they had inherited. She had found a city that received her like something remembered. She had found a child who believed without question that the universe rewarded the willingness to look. And she had found a man who had carried 4 generations of difficult legacy into a room one night, set it on the table between them, and asked her not to manage it for him, but to see it clearly, all of it, and stay anyway. She had stayed. Not because it was easy. Not because the complications had resolved themselves into something simple and clean. But because the right answer was rarely simple, and the right life was rarely clean, and the people worth staying for were always the ones who told you the truth, even when the truth was hard. That was what love was in the end. Not the absence of difficulty, the decision to be honest inside of it. And Isabella Romano had made that decision in a clinic room, and on a rooftop, and in a cafe, on an important afternoon, and on a street in the Quartiere Spagnoli, eating extraordinary bread, and she would keep making it every day for as long as the city held her, which she had decided was going to be a very long time. Naples kept going around them, old and loud and layered with every story it had ever held, and the 3 of them stood in the middle of it, ordinary and extraordinary at once, the way all true things are. And that was enough. That was exactly enough.